It was the screech of tires that woke me. I bolted upright in the passenger seat, Mason's voice an indistinct hum beside me. The smell of burnt rubber hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of gasoline. We were parked at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, one of those rundown places with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that screamed trouble. "What happened?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. "Idiot cut me off," Mason grumbled, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He gestured vaguely toward the road before killing the engine. "I'm getting us some coffee. You need anything?" I shook my head, my pulse still racing. As Mason disappeared into the convenience store, I climbed out to stretch my legs. The air was cold, sharp against my skin, and the station was eerily quiet except for the faint buzz of a fluorescent bulb overhead. Then I saw him. He stood behind the counter inside the store, tall and lean, his denim jacket worn at the edges. His dark eyes met mine through the smudged glass door, and for a moment I froze. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, like I was the answer to a question he hadn't asked, but the way his lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. I should have turned away. I should have followed Mason inside or retreated to the safety of our car, but something about the man kept me rooted in place, as if I'd stumbled onto the edge of a cliff and couldn't decide whether to step back or leap. The door swung open, and Mason walked out, 2 steaming styrofoam cups in hand. "Ready to go?" "Yeah," I murmured, tearing my gaze away from the stranger. But as Mason handed me the coffee, I felt the man's eyes still on me, burning through the glass, daring me to look back. And I did. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly, like he knew a secret I didn't. My stomach tightened as Mason climbed into the car, oblivious to the invisible thread pulling me toward the man inside. I told myself it was nothing, just a stranger in a gas station, a fleeting moment that meant less than the dust on my shoes. But as the car rumbled to life and Mason turned us back onto the road, I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the station shrink into the night. Something had shifted in me, though I didn't know what. Not yet. The next morning, the gas station should have been a forgotten blip in the haze of our road trip. It wasn't. I couldn't get him out of my head. That smirk, those eyes, there was something about the man behind the counter that lingered, like a half-remembered melody I couldn't shake. It gnawed at me, threading its way into idle moments while Mason rambled on about the work he'd left waiting for him back home. "You're quiet today," Mason said, his tone light but probing. His right hand rested on the steering wheel, and his left thumb tapped against his thigh in that steady, rhythmic way it always did when he was stressed. "Just tired," I replied, looking out the window at the endless stretch of highway. The lie came easily, though it wasn't entirely false. I was tired of the monotony, of feeling unseen, of the life we'd built that now felt more like a cage than a home. Mason didn't press. He rarely did. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, at a shabby motel off the interstate, I found myself reaching for my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what I was even searching for. Him? The gas station? I told myself it was ridiculous, pathetic, even. I didn't even know his name. But then, I remembered the name tag. Cody. I typed it into the search bar, alongside the name of the tiny town we'd passed through. What was I expecting? Some grand revelation? A clue to explain why this stranger had lodged himself so deeply in my mind? The search yielded nothing, of course. Just a few Yelp reviews of the station and a blurry photo of its rundown exterior. I tossed my phone onto the nightstand, frustrated with myself. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to Mason's soft snores, I realized the frustration wasn't just with me. It was with my life. With the quiet, predictable routine that stretched endlessly before me like the highway outside. I loved Mason, didn't I? But somewhere along the way, love had become habit and habit had become stifling. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 days later, I saw him again. We were on our way back home, the same route in reverse, when Mason pulled into the gas station for a fill-up. My heart kicked into overdrive as soon as I recognized the flickering neon sign. The same hum of fluorescent lights greeted us as Mason stepped out of the car, and I pretended to scroll through my phone, feigning disinterest. "Want anything from inside?" Mason asked. I shook my head. "I'll get it." The lie tasted like honey and fire on my tongue. Inside, Cody was leaning against the counter again, that same lazy smirk playing on his lips. He didn't acknowledge me right away, and for a moment, I stood there, clutching a bottle of water, unsure of what to say, or why I was there at all. Finally, his eyes flicked up to mine. "Back so soon?" he drawled, as if he'd been expecting me. We're just passing through," I stammered, my cheeks burning. His gaze lingered, and I felt an almost physical pull toward him, as though the air between us had turned magnetic. Cody stepped out from behind the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. "Passing through, huh? What are the odds?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my hands betrayed me, fumbling with the water bottle cap. He reached out, steadying my hands with his. The contact was electric, dangerous in a way that made my stomach flip. "Careful," he murmured, his voice low. "Wouldn't want you making a mess." My breath hitched. This was insane. I was insane. But when Cody's thumb brushed lightly against the back of my hand, the part of me that should have recoiled instead leaned in. "It's Hannah, right?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "How do you?" I started, but then remembered. The card Mason handed him for gas. The name on it. "Yeah," I said quickly, feeling stupid. Cody grinned, his teeth white against the scruff of his jaw. "Well, Hannah, you let me know if there's anything else you need." The words were innocuous, but the way he said them wasn't. When I stepped outside, Mason was checking the tire pressure, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I climbed into the passenger seat, the unopened bottle of water still in my hands. My chest felt tight, my skin too warm. As Mason started the car and we pulled back onto the road, I glanced at the gas station one last time. Cody was standing in the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets, watching us leave. His smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Something darker. And I just knew, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For the next hour, I barely heard a word Mason said. My mind replayed the encounter with Cody in vivid detail, his steady gaze, the way his voice curled around my name like a whisper meant for my ears alone. It felt dangerous, intoxicating, like stepping too close to the edge of a roaring fire and daring it to burn you. "Earth to Hannah," Mason said, waving a hand in front of my face. I blinked. "What? You've been a million miles away. You sure you're okay?" His tone carried an edge of concern, but only just. Mason wasn't one to pry, and part of me hated him for that. I wished he'd dig deeper, force me to explain myself, but he never did. "I'm fine," I said too quickly, a little too sharply. His eyes lingered on me for a second longer than usual before returning to the road. He didn't push. Of course, he didn't. That was Mason, predictable, dependable, and utterly blind to the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface. The next day, I found myself parked outside a coffee shop in town, staring blankly at the line of cars in the drive-thru. My errands lay forgotten in the passenger seat as my thumb hovered over the search bar on my phone. Cody's face flashed in my mind, the sharp lines of his jaw, the faint curl of his smirk. Before I could second-guess myself, I typed the name of the gas station into the search bar. My heart thudded heavily as I hit enter. The first result was a simple listing for the station. Then, a Yelp review caught my eye. "Best service in town." That guy Cody is always so friendly and helpful. I laughed under my breath, the sound hollow in the confined space of the car. Friendly and helpful. Sure, let's go with that. I scrolled further, but there was nothing else. No photos, no social media profiles, no breadcrumbs to follow. It should have been a relief, a sign that this ridiculous infatuation could end here and now. But instead, it left me restless, like I was chasing a ghost. That evening, as Mason and I ate dinner in silence, the weight of my thoughts grew unbearable. He was scrolling through his phone, the soft glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. For years, this had been our rhythm, a quiet meal, idle conversation if we had the energy. But tonight, the silence felt suffocating. I'm thinking of driving back into town tomorrow, I said suddenly. Mason looked up, surprised. What for? I just realized I forgot to grab that thing for the house, I lied smoothly, stabbing a piece of broccoli with my fork. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and returned to his phone. The ease with which he accepted my words stung more than I cared to admit. He didn't even ask what the thing was. But I wasn't thinking about that tomorrow. I was thinking about Cody. The next day, I found myself driving down the same stretch of highway that led to the gas station. My stomach churned with a mix of anticipation and guilt, but I couldn't stop myself. Every mile that passed felt like shedding another layer of the life I had built with Mason, layers I wasn't sure I wanted to get back. The gas station came into view, its flickering neon sign as familiar as an old friend. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled into the lot, parking in the same spot as before. For a moment, I just sat there, the engine idling, my heart racing in my chest. This was insane. What was I doing? Why was I here? Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my purse and stepped out of the car. The door chime jingled as I walked inside, and there he was, Cody, leaning against the counter, just like before. His eyes met mine immediately, and that slow, deliberate smirk spread across his face. Well, he drawled, straightening up. Back again so soon, Hannah? The sound of my name on his lips sent a jolt through me. I was just passing through, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Cody didn't buy it. His smirk deepened as he stepped out from behind the counter, closing the distance between us in a way that felt deliberate. You sure about that? He asked, his voice low. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. Why wouldn't I be? He shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. Just seems like you've got more on your mind than gas and snacks. The air between us was thick, charged with something I couldn't name but couldn't deny. I should have turned and walked out right then. I should have driven back to Mason and pretended this had never happened. But I didn't. Instead, I said, maybe I do. Cody's smile was slow and dangerous, like a wolf circling its prey. Then maybe you ought to stick around a little longer. Figure out what it is. Stick around, I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. The words felt heavy in the air, as if daring me to step into a world I couldn't return from. Cody leaned against the counter, his hands in his pockets, exuding an air of confidence that made me want to unravel him and figure out what lay beneath. If you've got time to spare, he said, his gaze holding mine. Unless someone's waiting on you. Mason's face flashed in my mind, his calm, predictable presence, the way he'd kissed me goodbye without hesitation or suspicion. The weight of his trust settled like a stone in my chest. I told myself to leave, to run before this conversation turned into something I couldn't take back. But I didn't leave. Instead, I took a step closer. I've got time, I heard myself say, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Cody's smirk deepened, his eyes gleaming like he'd just won a silent bet. Thought you might. He glanced toward the back of the store. Come on. Break room's quiet. The break room was cramped and cluttered, the scent of stale coffee mingling with the faint tang of cleaning supplies. Cody gestured to the lone chair, but I didn't sit. My nerves were stretched tight, the tension in the room buzzing louder than the hum of the vending machine in the corner. What are we doing here? I asked, my voice firmer now, though my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly as I clutched the strap of my purse. Cody closed the door behind us, leaning against it as if to seal us both inside. That's up to you, darlin', he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. You're the one who came back. I shouldn't have, I admitted, my words quick and clipped. This was a mistake. Maybe, he said with a casual shrug. But you're still here. I hated how easily he read me, how he seemed to see through every lie I told myself. His confidence wasn't cocky, it was something darker, more deliberate, like he thrived on peeling back layers to see what was hidden underneath. Why do you care? I asked, more out of frustration with myself than him. You don't even know me. Cody chuckled, low and rough. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe I just know enough. Enough for what? My heart pounded in my chest, each beat hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. He pushed off the door, stepping closer until the air between us felt charged, suffocating. Enough to know you're not happy. Enough to know you've got questions that no one else is giving you answers to. His words hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it, but nothing came out. Because he was right. I hadn't been happy in years. I loved Mason, or at least, I thought I did, but our life had become a script I was too tired to keep reciting. Cody reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and my breath hitched. The touch was so simple, so fleeting, but it ignited something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. This is crazy, I whispered, my voice trembling. Maybe, he murmured, his face so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. But doesn't it feel good to be a little crazy? The first kiss was hesitant, almost reluctant, an unspoken test to see if the line we'd just crossed could ever be uncrossed. But the moment his lips met mine, the world outside that break room fell away. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him. It was reckless and raw. Every ounce of frustration, longing, and rebellion poured into that single moment. My pulse raced, my skin burned, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. But then, as quickly as it started, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, my breathing ragged, my heart pounding like a warning bell. I can't do this, I said, stepping back, my hands trembling. Cody's expression didn't change. If he was disappointed, he didn't show it. Instead, he leaned back against the table, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze steady. You already did. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind replayed everything on a maddening loop, the kiss, the way his hands felt on my skin, the way he looked at me like I was something worth figuring out. Mason was already home when I pulled into the driveway. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, the domestic scene so ordinary it felt surreal. Hey, you're back, he said with a smile, glancing over his shoulder. How was town? Fine, I said quickly, setting my purse down on the counter. My voice sounded strange, even to me. Mason didn't seem to notice. You okay? He asked, pausing to look at me. You seem off. I'm fine, I repeated, forcing a smile. Just tired. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and turned back to the cutting board. But as I watched him, his shoulders broad and solid, his movements so methodical, I felt a crushing wave of guilt. He trusted me. He believed in us. And I'd betrayed that without a second thought. Yet, as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Mason's soft snores filled the room, I couldn't stop thinking about Cody. His words echoed in my mind. Doesn't it feel good to be a little crazy? And the worst part was, it had. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of Cody clung to me like smoke. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way he'd seen me, stripped of the roles I played for everyone else. The dutiful wife. The smiling hostess. The unremarkable woman in the passenger seat of someone else's life. Mason didn't notice the shift at first. Or maybe he did, and he was too polite or too afraid to ask. I threw myself into routines, trying to outrun my thoughts, but they followed me everywhere. Cody's face haunted my dreams, his voice an echo that whispered truths I didn't want to hear. And then one afternoon, the fire reignited. I told Mason I was meeting a friend for coffee. It wasn't entirely a lie, I did have coffee, though not with a friend. As I pulled into the gas station parking lot, my hands trembled on the wheel. This was madness and I knew it. But I also knew I wouldn't turn back. Cody was inside, leaning against the counter as if he'd never moved. When he saw me, his smirk widened and something inside me unraveled. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" he said, his voice low and teasing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at him, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear. He nodded toward the back. "Break room?" This time, there was no hesitation. No half-hearted excuses or guilty glances at the door. I let the moment swallow me whole, the feel of Cody's hands on my skin, his lips igniting every nerve. It was desperate and reckless, a collision of need and escape. When it was over, I leaned against the table, my breath ragged, my hair a mess. Cody lit a cigarette, the sharp scent of smoke filling the cramped room. "This isn't sustainable," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled a plume of smoke, his gaze steady. "Nothing ever is." I stared at him, waiting for something, an answer, a promise, a reason to believe this was anything more than a beautiful disaster. But Cody didn't give me any of that. And deep down, I knew he never would. That night, Mason was waiting for me when I got home. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands folded, a single piece of paper in front of him. My stomach dropped. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "What's this?" Mason didn't look up. His voice was calm, measured. "You tell me." I stepped closer and saw what was on the paper, a receipt from the gas station. My breath caught. "Mason, I can?" "Don't," he said sharply, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were dark, hurt flashing behind the veneer of control. "Don't insult me with a lie." "I'm not." "Stop." His voice cracked, and it was like a knife to the chest. "Just stop. I've been trying to pretend I don't notice, Hannah. The distance. The excuses. The way you can't even look me in the eye anymore." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Mason, Is it him?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "The guy at the gas station?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. The silence was answer enough. Mason stood, the chair scraping against the floor. He grabbed his keys, his movements abrupt and jerky. "I'm going for a drive," he said, his voice hollow. "Mason, please." But he was already out the door. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Mason didn't come home that night or the next. When he finally returned, his eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. Instead, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared so many quiet meals. "I need to know one thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight. "Do you still love me?" The question hit harder than I expected. Did I love Mason? Or had I just loved the idea of him, the safety, the stability? I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice trembling. He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that answer all along. Mason moved out a week later. He didn't ask for explanations or apologies. He just packed a bag, left the keys on the counter, and walked out the door. Cody called once after that, but I didn't pick up. Whatever fire had drawn me to him had burned itself out, leaving only ashes and regret. Months passed. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding a life that now felt foreign and empty. Mason and I spoke occasionally, mostly about logistics, bank accounts, the house. He never asked about Cody, and I never brought him up. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of it all hit me. The choices I'd made, the people I'd hurt, the life I'd destroyed. I reached for my phone and dialed Mason's number. When he picked up, his voice was quiet, cautious. "Hannah? I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "For everything." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then he said, "Me too." It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something, a fragile ember of hope in the ashes of what we once had. And for now, that was enough.